For Loop TV, I'm Gene Munster, along with Doug Clinton. Our topic today is the House Judiciary Antitrust Subcommittee report. It's a mouthful. They've been hard at work for 16 months. 2 reports issued today, in total 450 pages. It's got some weight to it. One of the reports came from the Democrat side, 2 came from the Republican side. In general, the Democrat report focused on the competitive antitrust side of it, and the Republican side had more about, is the social media left wing, is it left biased, and to keep that in check. So we're going to focus more on the Democratic report just because there was simply more mass to it, and go through it company by company. I'm going to start with Facebook. And the basic issue at risk here is their perspective of to copy a company, acquire, and ultimately kill. Copy, acquire, kill. I think of copying, think about what they've done with Snapchat. When I think about acquiring, that's pretty easy. That's Instagram, that's WhatsApp. I couldn't think of any kill examples. I don't know, Doug, can you think of any examples where Facebook killed somebody?
It's hard to remember the losers along the way, I think. I mean, maybe it's a MySpace, maybe it's a company like Path. I think there's probably some survivorship bias in that analysis. If you really objectively looked at it, I'm sure there's a lot of companies that maybe were features for Facebook. Maybe they were somewhat of a direct competitor that ultimately Facebook probably copied and it led to their death.
Makes sense. So we probably don't even know about which companies were impacted there. This is a piece where I think it's worth mentioning at Republican side about potentially amending Section 230. This is what the social media platforms stand behind that keeps them from being publishers. This has been a topic that's been batted around. Who is the arbitrator of truth? We hear that phrase. Why should investors care about Section 230 in Facebook? Why is it such a hot topic?
I think it matters because if Facebook ultimately is determined to be a publisher, it could increase costs dramatically for them because they'll have to start to police rather all of the content on their platform. They will be responsible for the content on their platform. So when harmful things are said, Facebook could be held liable in court for those things. And we've long believed that Facebook, whether they change Section 230 or not, needs to spend more money on policing content. It's obviously been kind of a consistent topic and a consistent problem. Yeah, and I think it's also a very difficult problem too, because free speech is a fundamental right in the United States of America. You could argue it's the most important right in the United States of America. Many other countries don't enjoy freedom of speech. China is the first one that comes to mind for me. And so we don't want a world where all of a sudden speech is diminished or controlled by a central authority. And I think that Facebook's in a really tough position here. I think there's probably some low-lying fruit they could do things better on, but we'll see how it pans out. I think either way, they're going to be spending much more money on content going forward.
I don't think it's going to pan out well for the company. Ultimately, I think they are in a tight spot, not only around 230, but their playbook of either copying, acquiring, and killing, if that becomes under more scrutiny, it's harder for them to keep at bay. Some other fast-growing social media platforms, think about like TikTok. So this is my company, Facebook, I think is at most at risk. We're going to shift to the company that you think is most at risk with this, which is Google. And at play here is how they show their search results. And second is Section 230, just around some of the messaging, I guess, around YouTube. And I'm curious, why do you think that this company is most at risk of the big tech relative to regulation?
I think if you think about just antitrust and who has perhaps hurt competitors in the market the most, I would think you'd have to argue it's Google. And the reason is that Google has historically, we know this, they promote their own products. Now, I think there's a good reason for that, which is many of their products, let's say Google Maps, for example, happen to also be the best alternative if you're searching for the location of something. So I think Google is well within reason to promote its own products, but
consumers are better off because of it too. The way they do their search rankings,
right.
I would argue that consumers are better off.
And at the end of the day, that's what I think the government should really take into account is what is best for consumers. But I think from a legal standpoint, the strongest case of any of the 4 companies, I think could be against Google because of this promotional element and how they've pushed their own products. Obviously, Europe has already gone through this. and sued Google for the same thing, I think we could see a similar result here.
I think it's just a mess. If I can have the last word on Google, and ultimately consumers are better off with their search results. I guess we'll let regulators determine that. The way we see it is then there's Facebook and Google. We can debate who's at most risk there. And then there's kind of the other two companies, Amazon and Apple. Amazon at play here is what they're doing around third-party sellers, how they allow them to promote their activity, and also the fact that Amazon is selling their own products. And the question is, are they a competitor or a partner to their third-party sellers? We'd love your take first.
Well, I think what I would say for Amazon, Apple, both, what I think is most interesting for them is I would agree they're probably lower at risk, but they also seem to have maybe the most vocal customer base that's upset. Google customers aren't complaining about Google. It's Google competitors that are complaining about Google. The same is true for Facebook. Facebook customers, they may be complaining about data privacy issues, but they're not complaining about the service
They are
itself.
complaining about different themes and different conversations and about how the
Freedom of
conversations are
speech.
toxic. Freedom of speech, yeah,
Yes,
that is something
yes,
people
but
complain
that's
about.
not an antitrust issue. That's a speech issue. I would say for Amazon and Apple, though, you've got on the Amazon side third-party sellers who maybe are not happy with the fees that they feel they're forced to pay to Amazon. And on the Apple side, you've got developers, the most vocal of which obviously is Epic. We've talked about them here before. But you have developers who are upset and frustrated with App Store policies, and they're pushing back. So I think from a protecting the consumer standpoint and who these companies serve, you seem to have the biggest cohort of customers that are actually complaining for these two companies.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to give you the last word on Apple, by the way, Doug, but in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to Apple. I think that it's a coin toss to how it plays out with Amazon. I don't think Apple is at a particular risk here. The two things at play are one, what the App Store take rate is, how they're doing some of the competitive pieces, and the second is preloading their apps. Think of Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, Apple Maps on iOS devices. And just to get to your point about the developers, that's true that there are some complaints with developers, but it's small. In the report, 45 pages were dedicated to Apple. There were about a dozen or so reports. Now, they're not going to capture everyone, but there are 20 million app developers. There's 1.8 million apps on Apple's. And my point is, Apple's just a big company, and it's easy to find people who are disgruntled. At the end of the day, the consumer wins with not only with how the App Store is policed, but also the consumer wins around how they have seamlessly integrated these apps that make, whether it's Apple Pay and these other ones that I've talked about, make them work with multiple devices. And so I think that standard will hold. I am going to give you the last word here on Apple, Doug. But the other piece too is the market share piece. Is this is called 50% of how phone owners are iPhone in the US. It's less than 20% of the computer owners are. So I just don't feel it really, it makes sense to take a shot at Apple, but I don't think it is going to really go anywhere. Would love your take.
I think that if we only were thinking about consumers for all four of these products and whether or not they're happy with the services that they were getting, I don't think we'd have an issue. But I think the reality is this is a highly political situation. And when politics are involved, I think that the way any case maker, any legal case maker wants to make their case, they're going to present the facts in a way that is the most strong representation for what they believe. And so, yes, Apple does not necessarily have a monopoly market share on, let's say, smartphone sales or even App Store, downloads. But they may have a dollar market share issue that the government comes up with as they think about monopoly from that perspective. And so I think it really comes down to what does the government want to do here with these four companies? They've obviously spent a lot of time and resources. They've become a political football for both the left and the right. I think for all four companies, I'd actually be surprised if all of them came out of this unscathed in some way. I think everyone is at some risk to see some additional regulation. Whether or not it matters for their business, I think is a fairer question. I don't know that much of it will, but
I
I
don't
do
think
think
it
you'll see
will.
action for most of them.
I think it'll matter with Facebook. I don't think it's going to matter with the other players. I guess I snuck in the last word there, not by design, but we do disagree on a lot of things. One thing we do agree on here, Doug, we agree on a lot of things too. One thing we absolutely agree on is we're a long ways away from resolution on this. This could go on for years. Likely other Loop TV episodes will be dedicated to it. So
Very
until
likely.
then, bye for now.